A silent war is waged for the throne of your future. Your enemy is formless, dwelling within you, feeding on your ambition, and growing stronger with every direct assault. You fight it with willpower, you attack it with shame, and every evening you find yourself defeated. But what if I told you the key to its utter annihilation is not to fight at all, but to give a single simple command that forces this enemy to self-destruct? This invisible adversary, this phantom that sabotages your greatest intentions, bears a common name: procrastination. And the doctrine you have been conditioned to follow in your campaign against it is a blueprint for perpetual failure. It is the dogma of the brute, the creed of the unthinking warrior. Society, in its simplistic wisdom, offers you a single blunted weapon: discipline. It implores you to exert more force, to clench your fists and your jaw, to wage a grim war of attrition against your own profound inertia. You are instructed to become your own slave driver, lashing your own back with imperatives and ultimatums. "Just do it," becomes the hollow war cry echoing in the chambers of your mind. You erect elaborate fortifications of rigid schedules and to-do lists, believing that structure alone can contain the formless. You punish your deviations with scorn and guilt, believing that shame is a motivator, when in truth it is a poison that saps your strength for the next day's futile battle. This is the conventional assault, a direct, predictable, head-on charge into the heart of the enemy's territory. You muster your finite reserves of willpower, a small, weary legion, and you march it directly into the teeth of the enemy's most formidable defenses. The outcome is as certain as the sunrise. The result is always the same. The internal resistance you encounter does not yield, it calcifies. The task you are avoiding ceases to be a mere objective and metastasizes into a monolithic symbol of your inadequacy. It looms over you, an impossibly high fortress wall, and each desperate attempt to scale it with the sheer force of your will only depletes your precious reserves of energy, leaving you more demoralized and defeated than before. This is the fatal flaw in the conventional strategy. You are fighting a battle on terrain the enemy has chosen and meticulously prepared. Procrastination, you see, draws its very lifeblood from the feeling of being overwhelmed. It thrives on the perception of a great and arduous struggle. When you engage it with ferocity and force, you are not starving it. You are offering it a lavish banquet. You are validating its power, confirming its assessment that the task ahead is indeed a monumental threat. You become an unwitting accomplice in your own subjugation, trapped in a predictable, soul-crushing cycle. It begins with a spark of resolve, which is immediately met by a wall of internal resistance. You respond by applying force, which causes the resistance to harden into a defiant bastion. You exhaust your finite willpower against this immovable object, and finally, you retreat in abject failure. The aftermath is a familiar landscape of guilt, self-recrimination, and a pervasive sense of personal weakness. This is the well-trodden path of the majority. It is a strategy that is loud, violent, emotionally costly, and utterly, unequivocally ineffective. It is the tragic folly of a general who believes the only way to conquer a fortress is to run headfirst into its unyielding stone walls, hoping they will crumble before his own spirit is shattered. This is not the path of strength. It is the path of profound weakness, tragically masquerading as fortitude. But there exists another way, a superior path, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effect. It is the way of the strategist, the path of the master who comprehends the true nature of power. The great general Sun Tzu, in his timeless treatise, inscribed a principle that holds the very key to dismantling your procrastination forever. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This single profound insight illuminates the path out of your cyclical defeat. The strategist understands that an adversary like procrastination, an internal psychological defense mechanism born from a cocktail of fear, anxiety, and doubt, can never be vanquished by a frontal assault. To attack it directly is to trigger its defenses and amplify its strength. The true path to an unassailable victory lies not in crude confrontation, but in surgical subtlety. It lies not in the application of force, but in the art of profound misdirection. It is not a battle of will, which is a finite and fluctuating resource, but an exercise of supreme intelligence which is limitless. The master does not waste energy asking, "How can I become stronger than my own resistance?" Instead, the master poses a far more powerful question. How can I render my resistance entirely irrelevant? The first maneuver of the strategist is not an act of aggression, but one of absolute stillness. The first move is not to attack, but to observe, to become quiet. To understand the fundamental nature of this internal enemy, you must recognize that procrastination is not a manifestation of laziness. It is a shield. It is a primitive, misguided guardian, an overzealous sentry in the fortress of your mind, whose sole purpose is to protect you from what it perceives as a threat. These threats are the specters of failure, the sting of judgment, the suffocating boredom of a tedious task, or the paralyzing anxiety of a vast, overwhelming project. This guardian's only job is to sound the alarm when a great and threatening challenge appears on the horizon. The conventional warrior hears this alarm bell and, in a surge of adrenaline and defiance, charges forward, thereby creating the very battle the guardian was designed to prevent. The strategist, however, hears the same alarm and allows a quiet smile. For the strategist has studied the guardian and knows its critical weakness. It is trained only to spot large, advancing armies. It possesses no protocol for a single silent operative slipping through a small, forgotten gate in the dead of night. The strategist does not engage in the battle everyone expects. The strategist redefines the very dimensions of the battlefield. The strategist manipulates the psychological terrain and controls the perception of the conflict until the enemy's greatest strength, its sensitivity to large threats, becomes its fatal vulnerability. The supreme art is not to demolish the wall, but to walk through a doorway you have created, making the wall a meaningless relic of a conflict that never occurred. The path to your ultimate victory begins not with a desperate war cry, but with a calm, deliberate whisper. It is a quiet, surgical act of strategy that completely bypasses the enemy's defenses, leaving it disoriented, disarmed, and utterly powerless. You will learn to move with such exquisite subtlety that your procrastination does not even recognize a move has been made against it until the war is already over. Its own defensive protocols, its very reason for being, will be turned against it, compelling it to yield without a single drop of your precious willpower being spilled in futile conflict. This is the art of securing victory long before the battle has even begun. This is the foundation of unshakable self-mastery. Your first lesson is this: you must stop fighting the war you have been losing your entire life. Instead, you will learn to command the battlefield itself, making your enemy's resistance not only futile, but conceptually impossible. This is how you transform a brutal war of attrition into an elegant and effortless triumph, for procrastination, when presented with an obstacle too insignificant to resist, becomes a weapon that obediently dismantles itself. Comment "I am the master of inertia" to claim this principle as your own, and subscribe for the coming lessons on the art of conquering the self. To subdue the enemy without fighting is not a magical incantation. It is the final result of a perfectly executed strategy. This strategy is built upon a foundation of timeless principles, the invisible architecture of victory. The common person seeks a tactic, a quick trick to solve their immediate problem. But the strategist understands that a tactic without a principle is like a branch without a root. It will soon wither and fail. To truly command your inner world and force procrastination to devour itself, you must master the fundamental laws of this invisible war. These are not rules to be memorized, but forces to be understood and directed, just as a sailor understands the wind and the tides. The first and most critical of these is the principle of knowledge. Sun Tzu stated, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." This is the cornerstone upon which all strategy is built. First, you must know your enemy. You have been taught to see procrastination as a monolithic beast of laziness, a flaw in your character. This is a fatal miscalculation. Procrastination is not a monster, it is a machine. It is a simple, predictable algorithm running in your primal mind, a piece of ancient code written with one purpose: threat avoidance. It is a guard at the gate of your consciousness, and its sole function is to prevent you from engaging with anything that triggers feelings of anxiety, fear of failure, boredom, or the overwhelming dread of a monumental task. It does not think. It does not reason. It simply reacts to the perception of a threat. It is this last point that is the key. Its reality is perception. Therefore, he who controls perception controls the machine. Your campaign against this enemy has failed because you have been trying to outmuscle a guard that is infinitely strong in its domain. The strategist does not fight the guard. The strategist studies its programming. By understanding that procrastination is merely a reactive mechanism, you strip it of its mythological power. It ceases to be a reflection of your worth and becomes what it truly is, a predictable pattern. And any pattern, once understood, can be exploited. Now you must know yourself. This is the second half of the equation. You must observe without judgment what activates this internal machine. What is the specific flavor of discomfort you are avoiding? Is it the fear of imperfection that prevents you from starting a creative project? Is it the suffocating boredom of an administrative task? Is it the sheer, paralyzing scale of a long-term goal? This self-knowledge is not an exercise in psychoanalysis. It is tactical reconnaissance. You are mapping your own internal triggers. When you understand that you are not fighting laziness, but rather a specific identifiable fear of not being good enough or a visceral aversion to tedious repetition, the formless enemy takes on a distinct shape. This clarity is power. It allows you to move from fighting a nebulous fog of war to targeting a specific known weakness in the enemy's and your own defensive line. To know these two things, that your enemy is a simple machine reacting to perceived threats, and that you yourself provide the very perceptions that activate it, is to hold the schematic for its dismantling. With this knowledge, you can now wield the second principle, the art of deception. Sun Tzu declared, "All warfare is based on deception." The strategist never engages the enemy where it is strongest. Instead, he creates a diversion, a feint, a false reality that lures the enemy's strength elsewhere, leaving its critical points undefended. Your mind trick is precisely this, a sophisticated act of psychological deception directed at the primitive guard in your mind. You will not announce your true intention to complete a great and difficult task. To do so would be the act of a foolish general, telegraphing his main assault to a heavily fortified position. Instead, you will present an offering so small, so ludicrously non-threatening, that it slips past the guard's defenses completely unnoticed. This is the strategy of the Trojan horse. You do not ask your mind to conquer the city of Troy. You ask it to accept a small, harmless wooden horse. This is where the practical application becomes an art form. Your true objective might be to write a 10-page report. The guard hears this and sounds every alarm, locking down the gates of action. The perceived effort is immense. The threat of failure is high. The strategist employing deception redefines the mission. The new mission is not write the report. The new mission is open the document and write a single sentence. This command is the Trojan horse. The internal guard inspects this proposed action. It assesses the threat level. Open a document? Write one sentence? The energy cost is negligible. The risk of failure is non-existent. It is an action so insignificant that mobilizing a defense against it would be a greater expenditure of energy than simply allowing it. And so, the guard stands down. The gate is opened. And in that moment, the war is won. This is the essence of the 2-minute rule or the first step rule. They are not mere productivity hacks. They are precision-engineered instruments of deception. Your aim is not to clean the entire house, but to put one dish in the dishwasher. Your goal is not to go for an hour-long run, but to put on your running shoes. You present an action so ridiculously small that it becomes impossible for the mind's defense algorithm to justify resisting it. Procrastination, the mighty fortress, has been breached not by a battering ram but by a whisper. This leads us to the third principle, mastering the terrain. Sun Tzu taught that the astute warrior shapes the battlefield to his advantage, imposing his will upon the landscape of the conflict. For this internal war, the terrain is not physical, it is psychological. It is the mental and emotional landscape upon which the idea of the task exists. Procrastination gains its power by transforming the terrain into an impassable mountain range. It makes the task look steep, treacherous, and shrouded in fog. The strategist, however, is a master of psychological terraforming. By using deception, you fundamentally alter the terrain. The mountain of writing a book is flattened into the simple, solid ground of writing one paragraph. The treacherous swamp of organizing your finances is drained and replaced by the single clear path of finding one bill to pay. You are not changing the ultimate destination, but you are radically altering the nature of the first step of the journey. You impose your will on the landscape. You decree that the battlefield will not be a sheer cliff face of overwhelming effort, but a gentle, downward slope of effortless initiation. Procrastination, the enemy that thrives on intimidating terrain, suddenly finds itself standing on flat, open ground with no tactical advantage. Its primary weapon, the feeling of being overwhelmed, has been neutralized. It is disoriented, its purpose made moot by the very environment you have crafted. Knowledge reveals the enemy's nature. Deception provides the tool to bypass its defenses, and mastery of the terrain creates the perfect conditions for that tool to be deployed with absolute and guaranteed success. You do not overpower your procrastination. You render its entire existence strategically irrelevant. You have now been given the strategic principles, knowledge of the enemy and the self, the art of deception, and the mastery of the psychological terrain. But these principles are merely lines on a map. They are useless in the hands of a commander who is not the master of his own mind. The most brilliant strategy will shatter if executed by a general whose heart is in turmoil. The most critical battles are not fought on the fields of action, but in the silent chambers of the mind, long before any external move is made. This is the domain of the third stage, the mastery of the psychological battlefield. Here you cease to be a soldier following orders and become the sovereign of your own internal state. For Sun Tzu understood that the first and most decisive victory is always the victory over the self. This internal war is the subtlest and most profound. Your procrastination is not just a mechanism, it is an emotional creature. It feeds on your frustration. It draws strength from your anxiety. It is nourished by your guilt and self-loathing. Every time you react to your own inaction with a surge of negative emotion, you are sending supplies to the enemy garrison. You are reinforcing the very fortress you wish to overcome. The common person lives in a state of perpetual internal chaos. Their mind is a stormy sea, thrashed by the winds of impatience, pride, fear, and anger. When they fail to act, they whip themselves with criticism, creating a tempest of self-doubt that makes future action even more difficult. The strategist, by contrast, cultivates a mind like the deep ocean. The surface may be stirred by the events of the day, but the depths remain profoundly still, calm, and powerful. This is the first discipline, the mastery of emotion. It is not the suppression of feeling, but the refusal to allow feeling to dictate strategy. When the impulse to procrastinate arises, you do not meet it with anger. You do not engage it with panicked bargaining. You simply observe it, with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a specimen. You acknowledge its presence without granting it authority. This emotional disengagement is your greatest weapon. It starves the enemy. Procrastination, which expects a struggle and thrives on your emotional reaction, is met with a quiet, observant void. It finds no purchase, no fuel for its fire. The first victory, then, is the establishment of this inner peace. It is the understanding that your emotional state is a part of the terrain, and it is the one part you can shape directly, before any other maneuver is attempted. You do not conquer procrastination by feeling motivated. You conquer it by making motivation irrelevant, replacing it with the calm, clear, and dispassionate execution of a flawless plan. From this platform of internal calm, you can begin to practice the second discipline, the manipulation of perception. The strategist is a master of appearances, shaping how others perceive him. In this internal war, you must become the master of how your own mind perceives the task and how it perceives you. Here, we deploy one of Sun Tzu's most powerful and paradoxical maxims: appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak. This principle is enacted in two directions simultaneously. First, You make the task appear weak. This is the core of the deception you learned earlier. The monumental task of writing a book is cloaked in the feeble disguise of writing one sentence. The intimidating prospect of mastering a skill is presented as the pathetically weak action of practicing for 2 minutes. You deliberately present your objective to your own internal guard in its most diminished, non-threatening form. You are lying to your own primal brain, feeding it a narrative of insignificance to bypass its defensive protocols. You are appearing weak where the ultimate goal is strong. Simultaneously, you make yourself appear strong. This is not about puffing out your chest or reciting affirmations. It is a subtle but profound shift in your internal posture. While the action you are committing to is trivial, the identity from which you launch that action is one of supreme capability. You are not a desperate, struggling person trying to force themselves to act. You are a calm, calculating master for whom this tiny, insignificant first step is a foregone conclusion. It is beneath your notice. Its completion is not a question, it is an inevitability. You must sever the link between the magnitude of the ultimate goal and the emotional weight of the immediate action. You cultivate the quiet confidence of a grandmaster who, while seeing the entire board, focuses only on the single, simple, perfect move that is right in front of him. This manipulation of self-perception is critical. It reframes the entire dynamic. The internal narrative shifts from, "This is overwhelming, I have to find the strength to do it," to, "My strength is irrelevant here. The task I have set for myself is so simple, it requires no strength at all." You are not an exhausted soldier facing a giant. You are a giant stooping to pick up a single grain of sand. This dual perception, a weak task and a strong actor, creates a psychological landscape where resistance becomes illogical. Through the consistent application of this method, you begin to forge the third and final element of psychological dominance, an unassailable reputation. In the world, a reputation is the shadow that precedes you, shaping interactions before they even begin. In this internal world, you build a reputation with yourself. Every time you successfully deploy the small-step deception and take action, however minor, you are casting a vote for a new identity. You are providing evidence to your own subconscious that you are no longer the procrastinator. You are now the one who begins. Each instance is a small reinforcing victory. The first few times, there may be friction, but soon a pattern is established. This pattern gives rise to the most powerful force in all of human physics and psychology: momentum. An object at rest stays at rest. This is the law of procrastination, but an object in motion stays in motion. Your tiny deceptive action is the minimum possible force required to overcome the initial state of inertia. It is the gentle push that sets the boulder rolling. Once it is moving, even by a single inch, the entire dynamic of the problem changes. The force of continuation takes over. The first sentence written begs for a second to complete the thought. The running shoes, once on, make the act of stepping outside the door feel natural, almost inevitable. The strategist understands that the colossal energy required to complete the entire task is not what matters. What matters is the almost negligible quantum of energy needed to initiate the cascade. This growing reputation for initiation becomes your shadow. It enters the negotiation with your internal guard before the next task is even presented. The guard, which once met every proposal with suspicion and resistance, now begins to recognize this new authority, this track record of inevitable beginnings. Its resistance weakens, not because it has been beaten, but because it has been retrained. You have built a reputation so powerful that your own internal mechanisms begin to align with your intentions, creating a frictionless path to action. The ultimate power is not to win the battle, but to create an internal reality where the battle is no longer necessary. Now, before we reveal how to deliver the final, decisive stroke and consolidate your victory into an enduring peace, ensure you are subscribed. The ultimate application of this knowledge is reserved for those dedicated to the path of the strategist, for the final act is not about learning more, but about becoming the very embodiment of the principles you have been taught. The master does not simply know the way, the master is the way. The culmination of all this preparation, the observation, the deception, the emotional control, is the moment of execution. This is the point where strategy becomes action. The common person imagines this moment as a climactic, violent clash, a surge of power breaking through a wall of resistance. This is a profound misunderstanding. The strategist's strike is the opposite of this. It is quiet, it is precise, and it is almost anticlimactic in its effortlessness. Sun Tzu described this perfectly. The quality of the decision is like the well-timed swoop of a falcon, which enables it to strike and destroy its victim. Consider the falcon. It does not engage its prey in a contest of strength. It does not exhaust itself in a prolonged chase. It circles, it observes, it waits. It patiently rides the currents of the air, conserving its energy, its gaze fixed, its mind clear. It is the absolute master of its own state and of the surrounding terrain. Then, when the precise moment of maximum vulnerability arrives, when the prey is distracted, exposed, and unaware, it strikes. The attack is a swift, elegant, and final release of potential energy. It is over in an instant. There is no struggle, there is only a decision, and its immediate fatal consequence. This is the model for your attack on procrastination. Your period of observation and strategy is the circling of the falcon. The well-timed swoop is your deployment of the insignificant, non-threatening action. The moment of vulnerability for your procrastination is that fleeting instant before the feeling of being overwhelmed has had a chance to fully crystallize and take hold. Your strike, opening the document, putting on the shoes, writing the single word, is not a battle. It is a surgical insertion into that tiny window of opportunity. It is a move so small and so swift that the lumbering defenses of your primal mind cannot be mobilized in time to stop it. The action is executed before the alarm can even be properly sounded. What feels like a trick is, in fact, the highest form of strategic timing. You are not breaking through the enemy's defenses. You are acting in a dimension where its defenses do not yet exist. The sheer beauty of this maneuver is that it requires almost no energy. All the work was done beforehand, in the quiet, patient moments of strategic planning. The execution itself is merely the graceful, inevitable conclusion of a perfectly constructed plan. The feeling is not one of effort, but of flow. You are not pushing the river. You are simply stepping into its current. This leads to the final and most misunderstood phase of warfare, the consolidation and the aftermath. The amateur general believes the victory is the battle itself. He celebrates the taking of the hill, raises his flag, and congratulates his troops. The master strategist knows that the battle is merely a means to an end. The true victory is not the act itself, but the new reality that the act creates. It is the establishment of a new, advantageous, and lasting peace, defined entirely on your own terms. After your decisive strike, after you have initiated the tiny action, there is no celebration. There is no sigh of relief. To celebrate would be to acknowledge that there was a significant struggle, thereby giving the defeated enemy a status it does not deserve. Instead, the strategist simply observes. He watches dispassionately as the consequences of his action begin to unfold naturally. The single sentence now existing on the page invites a second. The running shoes now on your feet create a subtle but undeniable pull toward the door. The one clean dish on the counter makes the surrounding mess appear more pronounced, compelling the next small action. This is the cascade. This is momentum. The true victory is not the first step. It is the irreversible chain reaction that the first step ignites. Your objective is not simply to win today's battle against procrastination on a single task. It is to create a new strategic paradigm within your own mind. It is to recondition your internal state so that future conflicts are not just won, but actively dissuaded from ever beginning. Every time you successfully employ this method, you are not just completing a task, you are consolidating your power. You are solidifying your reputation as the calm, calculating authority within your own mind. Procrastination, the deposed tyrant, learns that its old methods of intimidation and creating overwhelming dread are no longer effective against this new leadership. It learns that direct confrontation is impossible, as you never offer a target large enough to attack. It is pacified. It is not destroyed, for the mechanism of threat avoidance is a deep part of you. But it is subdued. Its power to veto your intentions is stripped away. The enduring peace you create is a state of frictionless action, where the gap between intention and execution becomes so narrow as to be almost non-existent. And so, we arrive at the final philosophical conclusion about the nature of true power. The world believes that power is the force required to move an immovable object. It is the strength to shatter mountains, to bend steel with your will. But this is a crude and primitive understanding. The supreme power is not the force of the battering ram, it is the wisdom of the river. The river does not attack the mountain, it simply flows around it, patiently, relentlessly, until it carves a new path through the stone itself. It does not fight the terrain, it yields to it, and in yielding it conquers it. The ultimate power over yourself is not the development of an unbreakable willpower. It is the cultivation of a superior intelligence that makes a battle of wills completely unnecessary. It is the power to architect your choices, your environment, and your perceptions so skillfully that resistance becomes an impossibility. You have not learned how to be stronger than your procrastination. You have learned how to be smarter than it. You have learned to shape reality in such a way that the conflict itself becomes irrelevant. This is the throne of the true master, a throne that no one, not even the deepest phantoms of your own mind, ever dares to approach, for its authority is so absolute and its operation so subtle that to challenge it is a logical absurdity. The war is over, not because you have won, but because you have transcended the very need to fight.